In part 1 of this series, we will look at the need for financial planning. Why is it necessary to do any financial planning at all? Well, let's start off looking at generations. We had the Jones generation pre-1940, then the baby boomer generation, Generation X, Generation Y. We are currently in Generation Z, and we don't know what the next generation is going to be called. In Generation Jones, if one looks at where they spent their money, it was basically on survival, bus fares, train fares, etc., and keeping up with the Joneses. We then started to spend a lot more money in the baby boomer generation. That's when we add to the shopping list mass consumerism. Then in Generation X, they kept on adding to the list. We had consumer goods, of course no haircuts, conversation pits, high-pile carpets, and the first oil crisis. In the Michael Jackson era, or Generation Y, we saw the emergence of technology costs coming into your family budget, and the oil crisis then disappeared. And then life changed. It came from America in the form of Alan Greenspan and Bill Clinton. They looked at life and said, stuff the prospects of governments building houses for people. Let people borrow money and build their own houses. Now governments look at the prospects of trying to provide for a family, a medical scheme, unemployment benefits, social security benefits, and a retirement package. Governments say stuff that, and they say let's look elsewhere, and there is somewhere else to look. That somewhere else is in the East. And they say, stuff working, let's get someone else to do the work for us and make everything that we need. So in Generation Z, the silent generation that we are now in, we get, what do they spend it on? All the things that we had before, but the emergence of the mall and basically appealing to consumerism within children. Add to that technology and the costs of upgrading technology and the costs of cell phone and data contracts. One can see that the family budget is being strained more than ever. Energy costs have gone through the roof in the last 5 years. One can see there the consumer price index in red, mapped against petrol and oil in purple and electricity in blue. So when one gets to the next generation, one says, well, who is the next generation? Let's call that Generation Bieber. The biggest difference in Generation Bieber will be life expectancy. In Generation Jones, people lived for about 60 years, but a Bieber born today will live for more than 100 years. So when one looks at family finances, one finds that in the past, each generation has been paying for the next generation as we've gone along. But today, we are looking at a prospect of the Biebers are going to have 4 people living with them, their grandparents. So the Bieber generation that we are looking at today will spend all their money on the things that we spent money on during the Gates generation or the silent generation, but added to these costs will be enormous costs of energy and also the enormous costs of funding retirement and early retirement together with healthcare costs. So if financial planning can be pictured as a suspension bridge, we spend the first 23 years getting educated, then 23 to 35 getting started, that's where you spend all your money on consumer goods. You accumulate wealth from age 35 to 65, and then you retire for 20 years post 65. The problem that is emerging today is that parents are in the category 23 to 35, but they are having to provide for their own parents who are just reaching retirement, as well as their children who are in education. Thus they have become the meat in the sandwich. This is a very frightening prospect. Introducing the domino family. Domino 1 is you. Then you acquire a spouse. Then you acquire 3 children. Money, more money, and even more money. That was the old family. But the new families that are emerging have 2 sets of grandparents up the top. And the danger of this is that when one looks at the phases of financial planning, we spend 23 years getting educated as we did before. Then we carry on in the getting started phase until we are 55, and then spend 5 years providing for a retirement which is going to last for 20 years plus. It simply leads to an unbalanced suspension bridge which clearly doesn't work. with the parents sitting in the middle as the meat in the sandwich. So the domino family starts to rock. First dad rocks, then mom rocks, then the kids rock, and before we know it, the whole family's in a flat spin. That's what we're trying to avoid. Added to this is the problem of the sheer number of people that live in South Africa today. We have 1.4 million disabled people, then we have 2 million AIDS orphans, and we are already up at nearly 6% of the population. Then we add in 10 million children who are on child grants and 8 million children who are not on child grants. Add on 2 million old age pensioners, and we've got to nearly half the population. Then we add in 4 million unemployed people and 10 million people who are economically inactive. That's 75% of the population. This leads the remaining quarter to provide for the rest in South Africa, and 9 million of them have a job, yes, but they are below tax threshold, so they do not pay any personal income tax at all. Then we have a working class where the prospective graduate is going to live. There are 3.3 million, less than 1 in 10 of South Africans are in the working class. And then finally, we have the fat cats where a graduate should be aspiring to ultimately end up, but there are a mere 150,000 of them in South Africa. That's the tiny little red sliver up the top. So the moral to the story that we're looking at in starting off with financial planning is, why did we get educated in the first place? We got educated so that we could become economically self-sufficient. But the problem is that if we have one disaster post-graduation, then the domino effect starts and destroys everything around it, the entire family structure. This video is brought to you by the Sanlam Foundation.